Welcome to OCD Whisperer Show. Today I have Jonathan Schultz with me, and Jonathan has a doctorate degree in organizational leadership and a master's degree in educational counseling. He's actually an academic counselor at Bakersfield College, and his job is to make sure that students have what they need to meet their personal and academic goals. So Jonathan is somebody who was formerly diagnosed with anxiety, depression, ADHD around 18 years old. And at around 2014, he got diagnosed with OCD. Jonathan has had a couple of mental breakdowns around his OCD experience, and finally received ERP treatment at the age of 32. And today one of the things we will talk about is kind of that journey that Jonathan went through of getting diagnosed and getting to the right treatment. Jonathan, also, he and his wife have written a book, which is awesome, and it's going to be published next year. And he's very active on Instagram and TikTok. And I'll make sure to include those handles in the show notes so that you guys can follow. And he has been married since 2012 and has 3 awesome children, 7, 5, and 3. So welcome to the show, Jonathan.
Thank you, Christina, for having me. I'm really excited about this.
Yeah, I'm really glad I reached out to you. I've been seeing your posts and it kind of caught my attention. And I love to have people on the show who have lived experience.
Yeah.
Just talking a little bit more and continuing to spread the word and kind of relate to others.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, so I think one of the things that we briefly kind of talked about, and I would love to have you share with us, is kind of your journey. Like, what was that beginning of that process? Because I think a lot of people probably will relate to, getting wrong messages or not even being sure if it's OCD.
Yeah.
So maybe share with us kind of what that was like for you.
Yeah, for sure. And that's actually one of the reasons why I like to be so active on social media is I think my story is it's somewhat unique, but the more I get into it, it's a little more common than I think people realize. So the formal diagnosis came for the OCD diagnosis about 13 years ago when I was around 21. I was in college. I was about ready to graduate with my bachelor's degree. I had previously been diagnosed with anxiety and ADHD. Interestingly enough, because I played sports in college and I was missing balls in the outfield because I couldn't see them. So we went through all kinds of tests to see if I had vision problems or a tumor, and it turned out I was just getting anxious and my focus was changing. So that was the initial anxiety. After a breakdown, I was diagnosed with OCD, but I went to a therapist or a psychologist that did not know how to treat it. Never spoke about ERP, he didn't even know, never mentioned what exposures were or anything. So I did kind of the traditional CBT therapy for a while. I don't know, it helped a little bit. I was given some medication, which was more helpful because I wasn't getting the right therapy. But then the big kind of, and if I really trace it back, I mean, I had my first OCD cycle at the age of 7. So I can remember my first spin when I was 7. So really I've had it my whole life, but this is, the diagnosed piece that's a little more interesting. I was 32 years old. So I went 10, 12 years without therapy because I wasn't getting what I needed. I was ending my doctoral program and I really started hitting that classical OCD cycle. Didn't really know how to help myself by any means. On the way home from a vacation, I just had finally everything came to a head. I finally admitted to my wife what was going on, all the different thoughts. Definitely suicidal at that point. And so after we got home from the vacation, we made some phone calls. I went back to the initial therapist that diagnosed me 13 years ago, and I actually had 2 books with me. I had Brain Lock by Jonathan Schultz and one other one. I can't remember. And I walked in and I said, I'm back. Nice seeing you again, and he kind of laughed. And he said, I said, I have my OCD's flaring up. And he showed me a video. And I was like, I know I've seen this video before. Well, he showed me the same video that he showed me 13 years ago when he diagnosed me. And I was like, and it was a VHS video. I mean, we're in 2022, like VHS video, and the video said, this is true, we now know Paxil can treat OCD. And I was like, now no, like it was back in like the 80s. And so I said, well, what can I do? Here's a book. Like, I want to do something. What can I do? And he said, you can read all the books you want, but all we can do is really give you more medication to help OCD.
Mm.
I was like, frick, like, really? Are you sure? Because this book, and he said, no, like that's all we can do is just prescribe more meds. So I left very defeated. The next day I had an appointment with a psychiatrist to get medication or more medication. And he's taking notes and he said, are you going to ERP? I'm like, what's ERP? Like that's in a book, but like I was told that doesn't work, And he said, no, like if you have OCD, like you need to go get ERP. Like, are you serious? I was just told yesterday that you need more medication. He said, no, like go to ERP. I said, well, where do I go for this? And I live in a small little farm town in California. So he said, I don't know, like we don't have anybody close by that can do this. But I just had a client who went to a place in LA called OCD LA, and I hope I can say that. If not, you can
Of
bleep.
course.
Yeah,
Oh,
you can
yeah.
you
This
can bleep that
podcast,
out.
we share all sorts of
Yeah,
resources.
yeah, they're awesome. I mean, they're awesome. So yeah, I'm still going there. And so I luckily the psychiatrist was the opposite. He was like, we could do more meds, but you need the behavioral component. Like that's what you have to do. I'm like, oh my gosh, like this is great. So as I hung up with him, because it was virtual, COVID season, I called OCDLA. Ironically, they called me back about 20 minutes later. It was definitely a godsend. And I got hooked up with my current therapist, Chris, and we started the ERP journey. And if I had not gotten that second opinion from the psychiatrist, I don't know where I'd be right now. I wouldn't be working. Might not even be alive. I really don't know, but I absolutely would not be working because I had to take some time off work for a little while to take care of this. So it was interesting and it was scary. It was frustrating. And then as things calmed down, I asked my therapist how I could get involved in the community. I don't really want to go back and go to more school, but and he mentioned advocacy, and I said I like to talk, so let's post my story on Instagram and TikTok, and here we are. So
Oh, that's awesome. So I was
yeah,
curious how you got
yeah,
started on the
uh-huh.
social media. So that's great. I mean, you said so many things in terms of like, I think people on average learn and know that it really does take, literature says anywhere from, 7 to 14 years to really get a proper diagnosis, because I think exactly right. There's so many things that are happening internally that we kind of still don't fully know or aware of, and so
Yeah,
we would kind of don't connect those dots like, oh, this might be OCD. I mean, I literally have had the same experience where, for the longest time didn't know
yeah,
it.
yeah,
And I think the other piece that you're mentioning, that yeah, like once you do get it, not unfortunately every professional is kind of trained or up to date, and so sometimes you
totally.
may actually get wrong information, right? Or somebody might say, yeah, go get CBT, but CBT, just basic traditional CBT,
Can be hurtful.
there's parts of that that are actually not right for OCD.
Absolutely. Yeah,
Right? Like I think people hear about things like, looking evidence for or against a thought, for
yeah,
example, like
or
that's
the
only going to perpetuate your mental analysis, right? Exactly.
yeah,
Or like the rubber band, to stop thoughts, like, wait a minute, these are all things that literally do not work for OCD brain. They might work and they do for other anxiety disorders, but not
yeah,
OCD.
no, they hurt.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, they do. They actually perpetuate more compulsions.
for sure.
um, so since you're somebody who's had ERP training, for anybody listening who doesn't know what that is, it's exposure response
Sorry.
prevention. It is a behavioral aspect of cognitive behavioral therapy. Um, can you tell us a little bit of kind of what about it has helped you, and why do you think that it is important?
Yeah, so for me, and I'm assuming the audience, I know I've listened to a lot of your stuff, so there's probably a decent understanding. But ERP is the foundational. I mean, that is what you need to do when you have OCD, and it's exposure response prevention. You expose yourself to the stimulus that scares you, but you do response prevention, or you prevent yourself from doing the rituals. So for me, the first thing that was really eye opening going through it, my therapist was phenomenal on how he laid it out. And I'll give him a shout out, Chris Concata from OCDLA. I know he can't confirm or deny that he knows me, but he's literally saved my life. And I said that in the book. But what I learned at the beginning was there was a lot of things that myself and my wife thought we were doing to help that was really reinforcing the irrational thought, right? So going to my wife for reassurance, compulsively praying over and over, researching things online, everything that I thought was information seeking, even positive self-talk, right? You hear all the time, like, give yourself positive self-talk. And now I'm like, I'm doing the opposite. I'm giving myself negative self-talk or no self-talk because I found out very quickly that those were not only not helpful, they were detrimental because they were reinforcing whatever my irrational thought, my image, my feeling was. So initially going through the process, it was very much learning, like, oh man, like, you mean I shouldn't go to my wife and ask her every day if she loves me in a compulsive way? I shouldn't ask my kids if they think I'm a good father. Um, so it was really that first information getting, like, it was very eye-opening. And then understanding why, like, it didn't make sense at first, and my wife didn't understand it either, but it was like, oh, this is a biological, almost evolutionary thing. We see a lion, we get scared, we run, and then if the lion comes back, we get scared again. Well, we hear a thought. The running is what's reinforcing the lion is scary. Well, the reassurance is reinforcing the thought scary. So whenever that thought comes back, of course anxiety is going to happen. It's biological. It's literally what was supposed to happen in a normal situation. Our brain is just taking it down a path. So understanding how to not do or limit the compulsions was really interesting and very educational. But then the exposure piece was really cool. And it sucks, but it's really cool because some of the books I've read didn't emphasize in an exposure. Just to give a more example, and I'm assuming you've covered it, so I don't want to kill it, but you go towards the thing that you initially were avoiding, the thought, the stimulus, the situation. Instead of avoiding that Facebook post, you go back and reread it, and you don't Google the answer to it. So, I had never really seen what the exposure piece was. And I remember my therapist saying, this is going to be one of the most helpful parts of that, as long as you can do response prevention. It's going to be hard at times, but it's going to be necessary. And I've really seen the benefit in that, both for my OCD, but also for my personal life as well, too.
Wow, that's a lot of stuff you cover there too. And yeah, I mean, I think that's exactly right. You're hitting on an important element where, a lot of people kind of get nervous when they hear the words exposure response prevention, and
Mhm.
they kind of, I think, sometimes have this kind of myth or bias thinking of like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna like dive off the deep end, like right into my scariest stuff. And
Yeah,
what
no.
you want me to do what and entertain what? Can you speak a little bit about that, like what that process was?
Yeah, so the way my therapist approached it, and if you read some of the books, there's a few different kind of approaches out there for the exposures. And I like what my therapist did, which is kind of the traditional hierarchy ladder or menu. And what that is you take your top 10 usually issues that bother you in the order of, 10 is a panic attack. You can't deal with this thought. One is somewhat manageable. And you basically are working your way up. That's what I did. And what I noticed, and I remember him saying, you're never really going to go above a 6 or 7. That was kind of the approach. And then it changed as we went. We actually, because I kind of looked at it a little differently towards the end. But at the beginning, it was nice because, one, you don't approach something so scary that the only way to help yourself deal with is compulsions. I mean, it's kind of like throwing someone in the deep end that can't swim. You got to learn how to swim first. So what we did especially at the beginning, is we would take a theme that was scary but not too scary and approach that. If I was nervous about holding my kids, which was tough for a while, I would maybe get closer to them and put them on my lap, and then I'd pick them up and walk with them, and kind of work your way up towards the stimulus. And what that did for me and what it does for others usually is the 10s become 8s, the 8s become 7s, the 7s become 6s. So you never really go to that 6 or that 7 because they come down to you. You don't necessarily go up to them. They come down to you because you are learning the biology part of it. You're learning kind of the irrationality of the thought, not in a reinforcing way, but just, in a new thought pattern. And we went up the hierarchy that way. And I still do exposures almost every day.
Awesome. Yeah.
Some
And
way or another.
yeah. And I think part of what you're hitting on now too is I think that once you do once you've had that training with ERP and ACT aspects,
Mhm.
but once you kind of put that together, it's kind of like saying, hey, as a lifestyle now, I'm going to be really kind of taking this on. So, right, like how you make
Yeah.
decisions now, I'm assuming probably is going to be a little different because now you're like, oh yeah, this is a thing I feel the natural urge to avoid, but actually I know I'm gonna go for it because it's good
Yeah.
for me. So you start to make decisions differently, and so it becomes like an organic, natural kind of
Yeah.
change.
I've even embedded that in my parenting. My son's a lot like me. He's the 7-year-old, and he's got my anxiety, he's got my issues. And so we put him into jujitsu because that's a scary thing for people with anxiety. You got to be wrestling. And I'll tell them like, look, sometimes life's going to be hard. You're just going to have to go through it. You can't go around it. You got to go through it. So yeah, it's really infiltrated even my parenting. So
That's actually really beautiful and cool to hear.
yeah.
Now, I want to circle back to something you mentioned about you guys wrote a book, and in the book, so we haven't even touched on that. Can you tell us a little bit about what the book is about? Like when do you have any idea for next year when people could look for it?
So we actually have two. One is published right now. One is coming out next year. What happened was the day, June 6th, when I had my really bad breakdown and I wanted to kill myself and it was just terrible. My wife looked at me and she said, how can I help you? I said, I don't know. Like, I can't even help myself. So, we had the appointment with the psychologist the next day and still didn't get any help. And we were like, you know, we want to help people once I'm level. And because this was just, a very debilitating disorder. So so after that happened and then we finally got the help, we were like, we need to do this so the book was initially going to be called How Can I Help You? But then now it's the one published is called Obsessed, a couple story dealing with obsessive compulsive disorder. And what I think, and there's a lot of good books out there. I mean, so it's not like ours is better than others, but I think what sets it apart and what we do is we don't hit our story, we don't hit ERP, we don't hit we try to hit everything as little as we can, but with enough to make a difference. So we tell our story to help people see what it's like having it and living with it, to kind of see both sides. And then I try to explain what I did, because I think there's a difference sometimes when you read books from people that have been through it and people that just research it. One reason I love Jonathan Hirschfield books over others is he has it and he's a practitioner, right? So his are a little more relatable. So ours is only relatable. So we talk about what happened, what I had to do, the ERP method that we followed. I have a little bit of a different approach to exposures. So I have a little piece on there that I do. And then as we were going through and all these questions we had, we literally wrote down questions that I asked my therapist. And then we just took the answers and we put them in a book. So it's basically like, this is what we went through. How do you deal with the breakdown? How do you deal with the thoughts that I have bipolar? How do you deal with, I think I'm schizophrenic? And we just answer those questions in the book as well. So it's about 111 pages, is the one that's published. And then the second one that we're working on now, ironically, the best feedback we got was about my wife's portion of the book, which is the shortest portion of the book. So it kind of ticked me off a little bit, but she's phenomenal. So but people were very interested in like that side, like how do you support someone that has OCD? And then as we were looking through, there's only one or maybe two books out there that I've seen. There's one called Living with OCD or Loving Someone with OCD. There's not a lot there. So this is totally from her perspective, how to self-care for her, what she should do, what to not do. And it's really for anybody that is supporting or loving someone with OCD. I help her, I'm helping her write it just because I like to write, but this is her book. I don't know the title of that. That'll be out, I think, probably next June. I think we're almost done with it, but we're cleaning up a few things. And I think that's going to be the best one that we have. But we really just want to help. I'm not trying to make money. We explain things in a way that I think are easy to read. My dissertation, my chair often said, I write like I talk, which isn't good for a dissertation, but it's good for, I think, for books that you're trying to help others with, right? So I think our writing style is easy to read, but then we don't have a lot of fluff. We cut out all the fluff as well.
That's awesome. And I mean, I agree. I think in general, people who are dealing with this and really, take a brave step towards, putting themselves out there. I mean, I think that's the goal, right? I'm
Yeah.
literally trying to help because I've gone through something like this, right? And I'm trying to put something out there that other people can relate to, that it's easy, it's understandable, right? That they can
Yeah.
actually see, like you said in the very beginning, and I kind of smile because I'm like, right. Oftentimes when you're starting, you think, oh my gosh, this is so unique. Somehow
Yeah.
I'm so different. This is so
I'm the only one.
special, right?
Yeah.
And then you get into it and you're like, oh my God, like this is so common. This is
Yeah.
like, wait a minute, so
Yeah.
many people have this.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then you
Yeah, for
realize,
sure.
wow, okay, I am not unique in that way. Like
No.
this is written about in so many places. It's just,
Yeah.
when you don't know about it, you feel isolated, and then you find out and
Yeah.
you're like, whoa.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah, so I think
absolutely.
that's awesome. One last question before we end. So now that you've had this, therapy that sounds like, you're still continuing that, which is great. Can you tell us a little bit kind of generally, like what's your kind of overall well-being kind of plan, or what do you do, right? Because I think oftentimes people, and a lot of discussions are around, medication and behavioral therapy, or just behavioral therapy, or a combo of two. But I think sometimes people forget, like, you're a whole person. Like
Yeah.
there's more to us than just those two aspects. So what else can you do, or do you do, for overall well-being and health?
So I think personally we will see and I think you'll see more than me because you're a practitioner, obviously, that soon part of therapy protocols are going to have more physical and nutritional guidelines. I really do think we're seeing that in other medical fields. People come with blood pressure now, and it's not just medication; it's also. So I've really noticed with me, I try to eat clean, meaning anything that our ancestors could have eaten, I try to eat that. I don't drink alcohol anymore. I used to drink way too much alcohol. I am on medication for my OCD. I've been on that since I was 19, but which I think obviously there's a part for that. But for me, when you're looking at that, it's the eating is important. I definitely try to work out physically something, just weights or run at least 5 to 6 times a week. And if I don't do those things, I definitely see my anxiety go up. I also am very focused on sleep. I've really gotten into, there's a great podcast, a guy named Andrew Huberman. I'm not trying to pitch another podcast, but Andrew Huberman's great. He's a neuroscientist, neurobiologist at Stanford, and he's talking about the importance of sleep. So I've really I could go into my sleep for 20 minutes on what I do, with nose plugs and things to help me sleep better. So sleep is big. I'm on a schedule for my sleep very obsessively without using no pun intended maybe. And then I've also gotten into a few other physical workout things. Like there's a lot of research Huberman says about like taking cold ice baths or showers within your physical limitations. Even something like a home sauna, things like that. So
Mhm.
I've really, and then I have a reminder every day on my phone, that reminds me I have OCD, or reminds me about doing an exposure. So I also am trying not to run away from, the OCD, right? I think sometimes what gets people with OCD is, one, we forget about the nutrition, the working out, the staying active. That is super important. I 100% think that's going to be a new protocol in our, like, I think our therapy is going to be, or your therapy will be
Mhm.
like ERP, response prevention, exposures, triggers, boom, boom, boom. What's your eating? What's your working out? Maybe you do that already as yourself, but I think that'll be in the literature. But then I also think what gets me too is you have a few bad days or a few great days and you forget you have OCD, and all of a sudden you remember, right? I remind
Mhm.
myself every day I have OCD. I try to post every day to remind myself I have OCD. So I'm not running away from my thoughts or avoiding things. So every day at about, I think I just got an alert about 10 and 2. I get an alert that either has a topic or it says exposure or it says you have OCD. Um, Here at work, actually, I have little reminders about my OCD on top of my computer, and I'm really trying to just immerse that to where it's part of me. And then what I've noticed is it gets easier to deal with. But I still have bad days. I mean, I do, and I post that on social media too to make people feel good. But I think there's that holistic approach, and also I should say taking it to the end, where you don't just stop therapy when you feel good. I'm still going, just to make sure I'm good, and I'm still doing exposures every day in some capacity, even if it's a simple reminder, because I think that we often, with OCD, we want things to be over with right away because
Mhm.
we're scared, we're nervous, there's that doom. I still want it to go away right away, if I'm being honest.
Yeah.
But I think now I can see big picture, So again, yeah, I mean, physical nutrition. Also, if you're religious, for me, I'm very. I made sure to connect with my pastor. We're writing a book on mental health as well because we think there's a need in that field. So really a holistic approach. I think for everybody listening that especially has OCD, ERP is the best way to do it, but that is the foundation of the building. You still need to put up the walls and look at other things, and all of those, in my opinion, is what I mentioned before.
Yeah, I love that. That's a great overview. And I also do love that podcast, the Huberman Lab. It's a great
Amazing.
podcast. Yeah, he's wonderful. But I think, yeah, you're hitting on a lot of different points, and it's exactly right. I mean, as someone who's, both a specialist in this treatment and I have OCD myself, like I
Mhm.
can say like, yeah,
Yeah.
I still have really rough days and there's
Yeah.
still moments where you get triggers and just, right.
Yeah.
But it's just when you know these tools and like you said, when you really embrace and immerse yourself into all of this and make these lifestyle changes, absolutely, it has that long-term benefit. So you can really short circuit that cycle and don't let yourself spin out for hours and days on end.
Yeah. For sure.
Yeah, we're talking a lot about ARP, but I'm going to just put a plug in. There's also acceptance commitment therapy. There's also inference-based CBT specifically for OCD. So at this point, there's more options. And I think you're exactly right. There's definitely more and more of discussions around nutrition, overall physical health and well-being, the importance of movement, daily
Yeah.
movement, the importance of getting sleep, getting quality sleep. Like you said, nutrition, meaning that, nutrient rich, nutrient dense food, not just, very sugary or processed, because that does actually impact our bodies and
For
such.
sure.
So, yeah, thank you so much, Jonathan, for your time. And if people want to find you, how can they find you?
The best way probably I would say is social media. My handles are OCD strong. So OCD_strong for Instagram and TikTok. Anybody can email me from those platforms as well. Again, I'm not a therapist. I don't give advice on that, but I put myself out there pretty much 2 or 3 times a day on what I'm going through. So yeah, look up there, and then there's a link to my website, mentalhealthstruggles.com, that I have a few other kind of cool things on there. But the social media is probably the best.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for your
Thank you
time.
so much. Yeah, thank you.